Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on intro syntax. This is take 2 of this video lecture. Our first attempt at this video was rudely interrupted by the cat, who walked across the keyboard and managed to hit the stop recording button, and I didn't notice, so I proceeded to continue to give the lecture for about 25 minutes, and then only discovered that I hadn't recorded at the end. And as you can imagine, I was a little disappointed. So I'm going to, hopefully it turns out better now that I've had a test run. We'll see. But today my goal is to try to provide more evidence for the split VP. What we're going to do is we're going to look at some cross-linguistic evidence. Then we're going to explore a little bit of evidence from English. Again, we're thinking about severing again the agent from the lexical verb, and just trying to think about what we need to do to kind of get some evidence for that sort of difference between that sort of lexical contribution of the verb from something that's a little bit higher in the structure, that voice, that little verb, whatever we want to call it, that is doing that providing that causation, passivization, whatever else we want to say is doing that. So I want to start with some data from Persian. You may also be familiar with this language, sometimes referred to as Farsi. It's a language primarily spoken in Iran. It's an Indo-European language, but it has an interesting construction known as complex predicates, and the complex predicates have existed in Persian for a long time. They seem to have started to replace most of the sort of standard lexical verbs starting in around the 13th century. So if you're interested in diachronic linguistics, diachronic syntax, that you can kind of trace that. And the chief sort of thing that we know about these complex predicates is the relationship between these two elements down here. What we see is the word beating and the word hit, so kotak zad, is that they have a sort of critical relationship to each other, which is that the word beating is this sort of lexical contribution here. So the translation of the sentence is Minu beat the child. And obviously, you might say, hey, hit seems to have a beating relationship here. And that's actually somewhat accidental here. The way that Persian works with these complex predicates is that you have something that's sort of vaguely nominal, vaguely verbal, that then has a relationship with a set of simple verbs. And these verbs range in their meaning from hit, we'll see collide, we'll see, and there's verbs like show and so forth. I don't know if it's totally accidental because we're going to see collide in a second here. But these verbs range in their meaning, but it's the relationship between this simple verb, also referred to as the light verb, and this lexical element that gives you the meaning. But it also gives you the sort of status of the verb. It tells you, is this a causative? Is this a passive? And so forth. And that's exactly what we were thinking about last time with this split verb phrase. So here we have a simple declarative, Minu beat the child, and Zad is sort of giving us that simple declarative meaning. So Minu, child Ra, Ra there, it's Persian Ra is kind of a definite, it's complicated, but it's kind of a definite marker, kind of, there's more going on there, but we're not going to worry so much about that. The key element here is this relationship between beat and Zad. And we can passivize this sentence, but the way that this sentence is passivized, essentially, is that light element is changed. So it goes from hit to collide. So it goes zad to zor, and that becomes so the only element that really changes, obviously the argument structure changes, but the light verb changes. So if we were drawing this in a tree, all we would really do is shift out the light verb. And that's really what we were saying last time with English as well. It's just the critical element, the critical difference between English and Persian is that in English, the lexical verb moves up into the little V position, that voice position, where in Persian, we have sort of two overt elements that are occupying both those positions. And we're going to see in a little bit here, I'm going to show you a language game that I've argued, is actually that very Persian-like. Again, this Persian seems to be giving us some more evidence for this sort of split in these structures. One challenge you may want to do is try to draw these in a tree. Obviously, we're going to have some differences in the way the X-bar schema, the X-bar rules work in Persian. But otherwise, the tree should be pretty straightforward to draw for us. We're going to need to make a couple different assumptions, but it should be a pretty straightforward tree for us. And again, the critical elements here are the relationship between that voice and that verb. So I'm not gonna do the tree for us today. I could do it in the next video if I get requests for it. But I do want to maybe challenge you guys to think about that, to try to do that on your own. I want to do a couple other things with English. Play around with a few things. So one of the things that we can make some predictions about is that we've now argued for this new layer of structure, this voice position, and again, you might hear this referred to as voice, you might hear this referred to as little v, and I might use these kind of interchangeably. But we might want, if this position is really truly there, it should really have some sort of contribution beyond just the arguments that we made last time, maybe some contribution to the semantics. And that's really what I want to look at right now. I want to look at some evidence that we can get ambiguity that kind of critically relies on this position. So the sentence I'm going to look at is Samin reopened the door. Okay, so this sentence is ambiguous, but in a really kind of tricky way. And we can think about this this ambiguity, and this some of this comes from work, sort of foundational work from Hale and Kaiser. Heidi Harley has done some work on this. But the trick of this reading, and we'll see how this plays out, and it's really cool. But there's two sort of, and these are really kind of, the parsing these readings is really kind of tricky. And pragmatically, maybe it doesn't make a lot of difference often, but this is one thing as we work on sort of the finer grained nature of language. Sometimes we have to kind of get good at parsing out some of these elements. But one of the things we have to think about is what are the possible readings, and the readings that we can get here are one, that Samin opened the door twice, that she herself opened the door once, the door closed again, and then she herself opened the door again. And so in both instances, she was the person that opened the door. The other reading is that the door was opened, the door closed, and then Samin opened it again. Now, these might, again, seem like really kind of trivial distinctions in the readings, And you know, maybe in a sense they are. But what's really cool about this is that it is a real ambiguity, and it's an ambiguity that is predicted by this split in our structure, and I'll show you how. So if we go back to our tree structure, and again, I'm going to start, I'm going to leave off the highest CP. Again, there is this higher CP here. It's just not relevant for us, and my whiteboard just doesn't have enough space for us to kind of reliably include it. So we have a T, it is plus past, plus CPP, plus nom. It's going to select for a voice P. This voice P is going to have is going to be a causative voice. It also, so it's going to have an agent theta role, and also can assign accusative case. And then that's going to have, we're going to have a VP down here, which is going to be our verb, open, opened. And I'm going to go ahead and just put our DP, the door, in the specifier. You could also probably put it in the complement position. We could argue about that or not worry about it. And I'm just going to go with not worry about it. I'm just going to do this in part because we've already made this a case position. And then our DP Samin is here. So in this position, the door receives its theta role from open and accusative case. Samin receives the agent theta role, but no case, and then is going to raise here to get nominative case and check the EBV feature. So everything is hunky dory in this tree. So the tree is pretty straightforward. But what we were really interested in was that remodification. And what, so I said that was ambiguous, and the way it's ambiguous is that re can actually target two different positions. It can target voice, or it can target V. And when it targets these different positions, it gives us different readings. So when it targets voice, that's what gives us the reading that Samin did the action twice. She opened the door closed, she opened the door again. Because she caused the action twice. That re is modifying that cause. When re is down low, it's modifying only open twice. So she's causing the reopening of the door twice. So it's less relevant that who did the first opening. Now, again, it's really, really tricky. It's a really kind of subtle distinction, but it's a prediction made by this structure, and that's really cool. So again, we can see more evidence for this split between voice and V. One other just sort of fun little split piece of evidence we have, and this is from a new paper that I co-authored with a recent alum of the MA program here at SIU, comes from some internet language, some internet game language, the language Doggo. So this is typically done in memes, also some other internet speech. But one of the things that one of the properties of this language is it has things like one of the examples we looked at was do Goddo a respect. And this is roughly analogous to something like respect God, given all of the different parameters of the language game. So there's respect God obviously also frequently leaves off the overt subject. In the language game, you often also leave off the overt subject. Goddo follows the rules and so forth, but it has a lot of the properties that we associate with essentially with Persian. Do seems to be a sort of default light element in English. We also see some evidence of things like give showing up in Doggo, though not as frequently, and one or two other elements. But it seems to be primarily do. Again, do support things like that really strongly. And then we have these like nominal elements that are really kind of verbal in nature. And so again, and this sort of basic structure is exactly what we would expect if we had a structure that looks something like this. Well, and I'm calling this a V. It really is probably a DP or something like that. That is kind of having a that is verbalized. That's the thing with these complex. When we start adding voice, and we've talked about this before, that the relationship with our X bar schema and things like that is less relevant. But we have a sort of small clause structure here where we're going to get Goddo, which can still get a theta structure, theta role, from whatever the relationship with a respect, and then can in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm simplifying a little bit the structure, but it's the basic. This is the core concept, that you have a relationship between a nominal element or a lexical verbal element and this higher voice. And that's, again, I'm simplifying the argument, I'm simplifying the structure, but I'm just trying to provide further evidence that we really do have this kind of split structure in English. And what I think is also cool is that we can look for places well outside of the sort of typical domain of sort of English, standard English, things like that, to look for linguistic evidence. So in that article, we looked at internet language to provide evidence for formal linguistics. I didn't probably present that super clearly. I'll go ahead and post a link to the article in the description of the page, or in the description of the video. It does get a little bit technical, but I think it's a pretty fun one. I hope the discussion was a little bit more clear. I'm just realizing now that the cat also closed the quote I wanted to read, so that's going to take me a second. But I'm going to close the video there and pull up this quote, which shouldn't take me long because it is stored. All right. So I have a quote from the author Murakami. And it's from the novel Kafka on the Shore. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. And as always, I wish you all good health, safety, and I hope you all are taking care of those around you. And I will see you at the next video. Thank you very much.